Good afternoon, everybody. Don Fisher here. I want to welcome anybody watching, wherever you may be, whatever time it may be. This is Mom's Movement and Mindset, how to break through resistance and transform your body and mind. I have an awesome panel of speakers. We're going to be covering or examining a little bit more what resistance is exactly and how it can negatively impact our ability to move forward and progress towards our goals. So with that, I have our speaker today, someone I've had the pleasure to work with in the past. It's the founder and CEO of Motosize, specializing in personal transformation by integrating mind, body, and emotion. I give you Sonia Satra. Hey, Sonia.
Hi, how are you? Happy to be here.
I'm well. Yes, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, out of your schedule to be here. So we'll jump right in, and I want to let you just kind of let your genius shine here. I think it would be appropriate to start by kind of defining, at least from your experience, what resistance kind of is to you, and also maybe give some examples that you've witnessed from clients or potential clients that, like I said, you've experienced that have come up maybe in your career. So let's start there. I feel it'd be a good place to start.
Sure. So I think on a macro level, resistance comes in the resistance to change, right? And then that can trickle down in a whole variety of different ways. So it could be the resistance to engage or to hire help or somebody to actually take that first step to make the difference. Or it can come even once you've decided to do it, where you start to struggle or you quote unquote fall off the wagon. There's just this resistance to do the work, if you will, of what needs to happen in order to make the change happen. So I think, yeah, that can, as I said, that shows up in like just saying no or coming up with reasons why you can't move forward, or just not staying the course of what was of the plan of whether that be eating or exercise or sleeping or mindset, taking care of yourself. That shows up in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely, and I mean, I love that you said like everything that you said, and especially with mindset too. It comes back to that, and it's very like we can intellectualize it all we want, but at the end of the day, like we don't move forward and progress towards any goal without application. And It's the application. I feel that's the biggest resistance, is like the resistance to start applying what people ultimately want to do, like what they're looking to accomplish. So
I do think it comes under, I think it comes down to some fear underneath that, because people will do what they need to do if they're 100% on board. But I think that there's such a fear, there's such a of change, and that can, what does that actually mean? So that's often where I'll go first, of what is it that's holding you back? What are you afraid of? What happens if you change? Because some people are afraid that it's going to impact their relationship or their friendships, or even just their freedom, that now I can't eat something anymore, or I'm going to lose my sleep, or, anything that's going to rock the boat, that is impacting their identity as they know it. And that really feels threatening often. And so it's really trying to call out, what is that fear? And I'll often ask people, well, what do you gain by changing? That one's usually pretty obvious. People know what they want. But what do you lose by changing? Because we gain and we lose something with everything we do. And it's really sometimes in that you can get to the heart of what's happening. What they're going to lose is what they're afraid of, which is part of what's creating some of that resistance.
That's actually kind of touching a little bit on what I wanted to ask you next here. It's like, if no one's going to get on the phone with you, no one's going to research certain ways, like whether it be a coach or a workout program, they're not going to take that initial step unless obviously there's some sort of desire to change. So with this desire to change and to move forward, why would there be resistance? Why would somebody experience resistance if they really want to change and they want to move forward?
Because I think there still can be a disparity between want and do. And so again, I think going back to that sort of that fear factor or the pain factor too, the pain of changing might feel greater than the pain of where they're at. And so really trying to dig under that and dig deep. I also will sometimes do an NLP exercise where I'll take people into the future of what happens if they don't change, to sort of get a bit of leverage to really see, well, what happens, you know where you're at right now if you don't change, but what happens 5 years from now if you don't change, or 10 years from now, or 15 years from now? And really go there and feel it and see it. What do you lose? Where's your health then? You know, and as detailed and as bad as it possibly can. I mean, I've had people do that exercise and literally at 10 years they saw a gravestone. Like, it was that bad. And suddenly when they can step into that and not just intellectualize it, but literally feel it, then suddenly there might be a little more like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to die, right? So maybe then I can, so tell me a little more, you know, and that sort of starts to open a little bit of a door too. So I think it does, it gets into really understanding what's underneath the resistance. What are they really, really afraid of? And also getting them connected to the pain of what happens if they don't.
For sure, for sure. And I mean, that is definitely super powerful. I'm in the same boat there. Like, I think there's something powerful about like hitting bottoms, or like emotional bottoms, and you know, whether it's actually having to experience it, or like you kind of just said, like painting the picture. But I've also experienced too, like there tends to be sometimes like a trap door, because I love that exercise that you were just kind of like breaking down there. But
Yeah.
let's say you take somebody through that, right? Like you're coaching them through, you're working through with them, like, hey, what are the benefits of changing? What are the benefits of not changing? And even when they can put it out there in the open, and then they're still not ready to move forward, right? Or maybe there's just a little pushback or a give back. Like, is there somehow you would kind of help them through there, and like any kind of tips or advice you can give them to, I guess, get them over that hump?
Then I think I'll also look at different perspectives, because often people come to making change from a certain perspective, like this is going to be hard, right? Or this is going to require this amount of effort, work, time, money, whatever it might be. And so often also just, that's one, we know that, and we can feel what that feels like. So then shifting and taking a look at, well, what's another perspective that you could have? Not another option. That's the difference in that sort of perspective exercise, because sometimes we'll come up with different options, but it's through the relatively negative lens of the current perspective, and so it will cloud what else is possible there. So it's really taking a step, and sometimes I'll guide people through, I mean, I've guided people as much as 12 or 15 different perspectives, but usually somewhere between 6 and 8 different perspectives. And that can be like, well, what happens if everything works out? What happens if you love it? What happens, what's your, like, if you were to take a bird's eye view of it? Or what happens if you fail? You know, like, we'll look at all different perspectives and how does that feel in your body? And then give them a choice of, well, if you could go back to any perspective, which one would you want to go back to? And I always find that one really interesting. When I first started, I thought, well, of course, everyone's going to choose the most positive, right? But they don't often, but they will choose a moderately positive one. And that's the one they'll choose. But there's something that happens in that that's so powerful, because one, they're realizing that there is a choice and that they can choose to stand into any perspective they want. By standing in resistance, that is a perspective, but they could stand in 15 other ones. And that has a very physical feeling, a belief system that comes with it, and a set of actions that come with it. And so when you shift and you stand back in a different perspective, it's really interesting to see, and people will come up with things that you could never suggest to somebody. It's so personal, it's so accurate for them, and it usually does help get them over that hump, because they, one, realize that there is a very, very different point of view through which they can approach these next steps. And that helps sort of settle some of that little bit of that clash that sometimes comes up, you know, in that resistance where you're like, you're fighting it, you want it, but you're fighting it and you're not going to let down. And yet you want to let, you know, it's just like, it's a whole emotional, I could say something that I probably shouldn't say here, but a mess. Right in that thing, and you just cycle and you spiral, and it rarely like works out well. So you really have to just pull yourself out of that. As long as you're connected to the emotion of resistance, it's really hard to make change. So you have to get disconnected from that emotional feel, stepping out, looking at, that's another one, even just stepping out and looking at yourself resisting. That can be interesting. Take a look at yourself resisting. Notice what you're doing. Notice why you're doing it. Notice what's happening for you. Coming from a very non-emotional standpoint and observing the emotion is another really, really helpful exercise in terms of understanding. And even then I'll have people just start laughing. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe I'm doing that. Like, I know I'm doing that, but when you view it that way, it really sheds a whole new light on it.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, you touch on something super important there, because that is a great activity, like noticing. A lot of people don't realize what that is, though. Like, noticing is just, there is no emotional connection to it. And I think sometimes, you know, on the topic of resistance, a lot of times when we do notice things, maybe initially, it's even if someone's pointing it out to us, there's that tug of war of just being able to notice what's going on, what feelings are coming up, and then not judging ourselves for it, right? Being able to just not judge, like being able to just accept, like, hey, I feel this way, and then not judge. Because I feel the judgment is then, you know, it compounds, it makes it worse, and then prevents somebody from, you know, like, again, taking that next step, whatever that may be.
I couldn't agree more. The judgment is such a, and the judgment often leads to shame. And those are some of the worst possible emotions that you can really have. They're very debilitating, and make you spiral in a whole different direction and make it virtually impossible to move forward from. So I'm huge on removing the judgment and really looking at, well, what did you do? What could you do? What's possible? What's a small step? You know, sometimes like just going back to basics of what's a small step you could take. So maybe you're not willing to jump into a 12-week program or a 6-week program, but maybe you're willing to try one session, you know, or maybe you're willing to do this. Maybe you're willing to walk 2 times this week. Just that's it. You know, don't do more, you know, and really just start to slowly build the evidence as well that it's possible.
And that comes back to like this all or nothing approach as well, you know, when it comes to habit change. You know, obviously studies show like 2 to 3 weeks, 21 days, right? It takes to kind of form a habit, but that's not sexy. Nobody wants that.
No.
Nobody wants to take, you know, one step at a time. Like we want it now. So I can see how that gets in the way. But one thing that I feel like, you know, I would just say do the best you can to respond to this, but where does resistance come from? Because it's not, I don't think it just comes out of like thin air. It doesn't just happen in a matter of 1 month. I feel like a lot of times maybe it could be something that's an underlying issue that's been there for a while that sort of begins to get uncovered when we're faced with change. So I don't know if maybe you could expound on that at all, and from your experience and like what you've worked with clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think both. I would say there's 2 answers to that. One is I think human beings by nature resist change. We just do. We like to feel in control, even though we're really rarely in control, but we like the perception of being in control. And so anything that threatens that feels unsafe. And really we're after survival. And so it seems extreme to tie like taking a step to get healthy to survival. But if you really dig, you know, many layers deep, it will sort of go into, but if I change, then what happens if I lose this? What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? And it will eventually come to my survival as being threatened. And so, you know, there's a level of having to understand and realize that your survival is not threatened. In fact, it's probably going to be heightened by doing something. But really getting clear about that, and that change is positive and good. And so getting into those things. And then I think you're right. I mean, I think we become habituated to resistance. It becomes a habit, and there are certain things we become more habituated to. And we start stacking as well, like, or stacking negative experiences of, well, I've tried this already a million times and it hasn't worked. It never works for me. I'm not the kind of person. It really is a total belief system and an identity that you start to take on. I have a client who literally, she just lost 144 pounds and still going. It's just unbelievable.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
but
incredible.
it's incredible. It's just phenomenal. I'm just so excited. But it really, and she would say, you know what? It's not about the food. It's not about the exercise. It's all about the mindset. If I could say one thing to anybody trying to make the change, it's the mindset. And it really, she's like, I'll never forget the day I was sitting in a parking lot and watching people, bring out their bags of groceries and seeing the chips and the soda and all these, unhealthy things. And she's just like, I'm not that person anymore. I don't buy those things anymore. Like, she literally it is almost an identity shift. Is I am a person who buys healthy food. I am a person who exercises now. She's a real diehard now. She won't go a day without getting in those steps or whatever exercise she can do. And there were things she was not even close to being capable of months ago. And now she's like, I'm an athlete, So that is a mindset shift of, if you perceive yourself as an athlete, well, what does an athlete do? Right? An athlete works out. An athlete does this. An athlete makes smart choices. But if you see yourself as, I'm a heavy person who's couch potato, and that's who you have really convinced yourself you are. Well, that person doesn't get up at 6 a.m. to go to the gym, or doesn't buy those vegetables, or make the choice to have a healthy meal, so you're tying that. And that's where I think a lot of the resistance comes in too, is who do you believe you are? So if you want to be a certain person, you want to make this change, what does that person believe? What does that person do? Sort of go backwards, and then really start to work on those beliefs. Where are the ones that are at are the furthest away from what you believe right now, and how can we start to bring them together?
Absolutely. And the identity, I've actually done activities like that just for myself, where it's like, I write
Yeah.
down all the people that I want to be, or like that I look at myself as, and writing out the characteristics. So, like, I love that you've done that with clients before, because it's so true. It's like, again, we can be whoever we believe to be. I mean, is the ultimate outcome going to be there overnight? No. But I think one word that that mindset speaks to is also perseverance, because when you can, again, have that, it's not something, I don't think willpower, like, it's been my experience as well with like motivation. Motivation tends to be very fleeting and very short-lived. When we can come back to like why we started in the first place, like our why or our purpose, which very well I think could be that identity that you were speaking about. That's what helps us to get out of bed at 6 a.m. And I'll say this, and I'll turn back to you here, but like, I've heard someone share this before, where it's like, to build self-esteem, you need to do esteemable acts. And I think we need to start with ourselves. If I say I'm going to get up at 6 a.m., getting up at 6 a.m. and actually staying true to my word is very powerful too. So with my question to you now is, sticking on the positive now, when people start to overcome that resistance, stay true to themselves, right? Or stay true to the identity that they want, how does that start to build endurance or build strength, and maybe make it easier to start, little by little, continue to move forward and overcome the roadblocks that might pop up along the way?
Right. Gosh, Well, I want to answer that question, but I also want to tag on to something you just said, because I think it was such a fantastic point. And I think it's another way of approaching sort of like who you want to be, is taking a look at those values that you were mentioning, right? Like, I want to be a, an esteemable person, or I'm a person who lives in integrity. And many people actually believe that they are somebody who lives in integrity, or truth is a high value, or some level of consistency or showing up is a high value. They'll do it in other areas of their life. And so if you really highlight that and say, well, that is who you are, that is an important value. So living up to that value in this area of your life too is only going to keep you even more in integrity. It's going to keep you more in alignment with your truth, with your values, and who you really are. So I love that you said that. And I think it's another really positive way of sort of tying your mindset to something that is important, that and that many people do live by. Then to your question, so once you're starting to take the positive steps, I think there's nothing quite like success to really build success, and I am a huge believer of celebration. I really, really do. I think it's so important to wire that into your brain. What did you do? It's really one of my first questions of, well, what did you do this week? What happened? Even if it was the tiniest little thing, like, what did you do? How did that feel? And another one is, well, what did you do? And then why did that happen? Is another powerful question to ask at that point. Generally, I stay away from whys, but right then with success is a really great time to think, well, why did it happen? Well, because I chose to get up at 6 a.m. instead of sleeping in, or, well, because I decided to choose me instead of this, or whatever the case may be. But so what did you do and why did it happen? And then really take that in. I'm huge on having people write the lists of, what did you accomplish? What did you do? How did you do it? Because when you start putting your focus on that, it really starts to build your confidence, your belief system, and gives you the evidence to, prove, okay, well, I did it, 3 weeks ago. I know I can do it now. I don't have that excuse that I can't do it anymore, because I actually can. And you start to see results too, which starts to feel a little bit more fun and exciting. And, that caters to our need and desire for some immediate gratification.
Absolutely. So I had a client who actually shared with me something along like what you were just sharing. And it was a quote, but it said, like, when you're only focused on the outcome, you're no longer in the process. But when you're focused or living in the process, the outcome is guaranteed. Now, when the outcome happens, obviously, like you said before, we're not in control of that, but we're just raising the stakes, right? Raising the odds there. And then to one of your other points, and then again, maybe you could just share, and this will probably be one of the last points I'll have you share on from your experience working with clients, but this is so powerful. And I know for me, I'll speak from my own experience, ego plays a big part in everything I do, right? And I'm not saying, ego, like arrogant, egotistical, like it's my own voice telling me I'm good when I'm indeed not good. And like what happens is, whether it's a good thing, right? Good things build on good things, but things that don't serve me, they also build on them as well. So like back to the example of like getting up at 6 a.m. Every time I don't get up at 6 a.m., it becomes that much easier to not get up at 6 a.m. Right. So it comes back to like that purpose. What's going to get me out of bed? And then repetition obviously then leads into that, and like continuing to move forward, because that's really the only thing that's kind of in my control is the behavior, right? Engaging in that. So I don't know, again, last question, like based on, I guess, what I just shared there in that example from my life, do you have something similar to that in your like client testimonials, or you've coached them through something similar?
I think something that I've shared also with people is I love this story. It was Seinfeld, actually, who, when he was sort of building his comedy, he decided he's going to write a joke every single day. And he had a big calendar and X's, so he could see every day he wrote the thing. And it got to be the point where he was just like, well, I don't want to not have an X on there, because that's just like loser. And so he just had calendars full of X's. And it's very powerful sometimes to connect a big visual to your success. So like every day you get up and you get to mark that X, feels a little bit like a victory, right? And there does come a point where you no longer want to not see that, because that feels like a visual reminder of what choice maybe you did that wasn't so positive. So that's definitely something I do, is how can you create a visual reminder, a visual uh, thing for yourself. You know, some people do, they'll put like a penny in a jar or a quarter in a jar or something like that, where they get to build up for every time they do something successful. And then you can go get yourself at a certain, you know, something special at a certain point. But I think having some kind of a representation that keeps you not only honest, but that becomes a little fun and almost a bit of a game, so that you start to sort of compete against yourself too. That can be helpful.
Absolutely. And I'll just like add on to your last point there before we close. That reminded me of I don't know if I asked you this last time in our first summit, but do you ever read or heard of the book Atomic Habits?
Oh yes, love that.
Yeah. So like obviously
Such a
a
great
big
book.
part of that is the, you know, his like 1% rule, you know?
Yeah.
And again, it's not sexy, but kind of to the idea of like the X on every day, or like just being a little bit, if we can figure out a way to quantify, hey, how can I be a little bit better than yesterday? From day to
Yeah.
day, obviously not much growth, right? But from day one to day 365, 365% increase in life. We're going to see some outcomes there. But like you said, having that visual to see the progress, that reinforces the behavior and allows us to kind of keep moving forward.
And to take regular checkpoints of looking back and seeing how far you've come. I'll do that a lot too with people, of like, I really want you to, what did you do last month? Like what would be, so that you really, not only per day, but also over chunks of period of time, because, you know, it's another kind of great visual. You do just like a little change, but if you were to do that out over time, right, that becomes the big change. But we need to track it and we need to reflect back and see, because we forget. And we tend to go to what we didn't do yet. So it's so important to look at what you did do. And when you do, you realize you did a lot more than you think you did. And that can start to build your pride, build your belief, and just make you feel better about the whole process. I wanted to add one other thing, which that goes, if I have a second, that
Absolutely.
goes kind of sort of contrary. This is sort of another approach that sometimes I'll take with certain people, but sometimes the one step feels too slow. So if somebody feels like, oh, it just feels, I don't want to do it, then I'll take a leap. You know, it's just like, okay, well, what's a huge out of your comfort challenge that you're going to take? Like maybe it's run a 10K or do a Spartan race, or I don't know, swim a mile, but something that's really big, you know. But sometimes the excitement of being able to accomplish something really big can actually be a motivator. So it depends on the person. That doesn't work for everyone, but it is also a strategy that, you know, sometimes you just have to go big. And then you're like, well, I don't want to be out on that course not having, you know, ever worked out. So it gives you something to strive for. So it's another way to go about it.
I love that. I don't think I've ever really tried that with clients before, but like you're right, like person to person, like everyone is unique, and like what works for one person,
Yeah.
like what lights their fire is probably not going to work for somebody else. But at the end of the day, whatever gets us, gets them, it doesn't really matter, you know, as long as we're moving forward, you know, and not allowing ourselves to fall into the negative pitfalls that are going to take us back. But honestly, Sonia, I mean, I loved everything you said today. You have any other like final comments, questions, concerns, points that you want to add on?
Oh gosh, yeah, I just think I've just become really just almost militant about focusing. Sounds like a sort of contrary word for what I'm about to say, but really about focusing on what you've done and what you have, what you've done and what you have, and building on that. And really just, yes, you want to look at where you went off, but we're too habituated to the emotional tie to that. And it's too easy if we give ourselves permission to go there time and time again. And so we want to stop that neural pathway in our brain, and we want to create and build a more positive one. So really focus on what you feel what you focus on. So focus on what's right and what's working and build on that.
Awesome. So thank you again, everybody watching home. Again, we have founder, CEO of Motorsize, Sonia Satra. Sonia, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, adding value to the summit. Loved having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely.